introduce Patrick Kelley. Patrick is the founder and CTO of Critical Path Security and Leargas Security. He's going to talk about remote work and cybersecurity challenges. And that's something that I think we're all pretty familiar with right now. We'd love to hear more and learn from Patrick. Thank you, Patrick.
Hey, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. It's great to be with you all today. So it's been an amazing conference so far today, and it truly is my pleasure to be a part of it. We just have a short amount of time for us to talk today. So we're going to get right into it. If you want to find out more about me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I hate doing bios and talking about where I've been and what I've done when we have a short amount of time, because this is really about you. It's not about me. So if you want to find out about where I've been and the company and what we've done and all those things, please go to LinkedIn, and let's go ahead and move into today's talk. So I want to get to the point. The reason why I'm here today is because I don't want you to be one of these 2-5 businesses. As we've seen over the past year and a half, when companies are hit with ransomware, it is almost fatal by default. More than 40% are gone. And here's the thing, you never really hear about these companies. So large companies have insurance caches, they have policies that come in and take care of it. They have, Bitcoin or cryptocurrency to help pay a ransom. There's something to talk about after they have a ransomware incident. Unfortunately, the majority of the small organizations that have a full-on ransomware event, there isn't anyone left to go and talk to. They are simply closed up and gone. And unfortunately, as we went through 2020 and into 2021, we found many CISOs were actually willing to let an event take place. They wanted to contain it, but they felt that unless there was a breach of that magnitude, that they weren't really being listened to, even with the increase in ransomware attacks that took place through the end of last year. And it gets even worse. The people that were looking to lead us through these crises and a plan and to help us get to the other side and survive it, many of them have moved to self-medicating with alcohol. In fact, the increase of CISOs that were attending support groups and just announcing that they were struggling with mental health and alcoholism went through the roof. 88% worked more than 40 hours a week. 32% were working up to 68 hours a week. And many of us, 20%, were on call 24/7, 365. So if we kind of take a moment to understand, the stress that's come through this and the increase in ransomware and the attacks that we've seen and the gravity of those attacks, we realize that we have to get in front of it. So here's where we're going to do something a little bit differently today. I don't want to spend a ton of time going through what's been going wrong. I want to go ahead and move past the despair and get into ways that you can help yourselves. So understanding the problem, we were not ready. When we walked into the pandemic last year, we were roughly 5 to 10% remote workforce across most of the organizations, at least in the United States. Overnight, we went to 95%. That was an entire shift in organizations that we just weren't ready to deal with. No VPN. There wasn't enough licenses. The internet pipes that were coming into the organizations simply did not have the bandwidth to support that much traffic coming in remote. Understanding that in most organizations, you have millions of dollars of switching equipment that helps us work extraordinarily quickly all day long. Now we were moving much of that workload out to the ISPs, which themselves were simply not ready for that. A lot of the internal operations were moved to external operations, but there's this big push with very little planning behind it. So third-party vendor agreements weren't really fleshed out. Expectations of what we hoped from our third-party vendors weren't clearly defined. This led to additional breaches. We also had people that were trying to work from home from their own equipment at home. The ability to deploy new equipment and to hire new individuals on and get things like two-factor authentication in place were really quite tough when those processes weren't defined, and they certainly weren't defined at scale. And again, what if? So most of the companies, that we speak to throughout the year, and even the ones that we go in an instant response, they really have a hard time believing that it's happened to them. And we try to explain that, we're not excluded from this. If you look at FireEye, you look at SolarWinds, you look at other organizations in the security space that have been breached, you understand that this problem is quite significant. And most organizations, even security organizations, simply aren't ready to battle this yet. So here's the takeaways, right? ISPs lack capacity, the orgs lack structure, orgs lack procedures, communication was fractured. What is the expectation that we're expecting of our employees when we send them home? What is the expectation of our third-party vendors when we bring them in to help us get through these problems? And what is Slack? So we had a lot of organizations that truly didn't know the answer to, should we use Microsoft Teams? Should we use Slack? Should we move to Discord? What do these mean? And how do we keep our teams glued together and moving in the same direction to achieve our goals in the middle of this huge shift? Unfortunately, as we went through ransomware attacks this past year and we went through the instant response, we found that even through the process of the newsreels and the headlines about organizations being breached, we still weren't learning the lessons that we needed to learn. We still weren't making those shifts, and largely because it's hard. So as I mentioned, when we made this big shift last year, and now we're still seeing it in this work from home, work from anywhere sort of paradigm, is that we took a lot of sensitive information, a lot of our servers that held that sensitive information, and we put it directly on the internet. Now, to explain the difference, before you would have maybe a VPN connection and you would remote into that VPN connection. And then from there, you could open your files and you could interact with those applications. A lot of that wasn't possible. Again, not enough licenses on the VPN. It hadn't been deployed. We didn't know where we were going to deploy it. Is it going to go on the XP machine at an employee's house that they just never really felt the need to update because they're just on Facebook with it? A lot of things really took a shift, but when we move things straight to the edge, this is where we saw the increase in the ransomware attacks, where we really saw this whole shift take off. And we understood as we were working with COVID care units in hospitals and military and supply chains that no one is safe, no one's immune, and you have to have a plan. So, dark truth. I don't believe in using a lot of stock photography in my talks. So if you look at the right-hand column here in black, this is actually a snippet screenshot that I took this morning of actual companies, their IP addresses and accounts. I did redact the password for the safety of the organizations. But you need to understand that credentials to remote control your external servers, get into your VPN connections, VNC. These are being traded like baseball cards right now. That's the harsh truth. Typically, they're going between $1 and $3 per account to gain access to a company. So you have to understand that it's not a decision of can we breach this company, it's a decision of do we want to breach this company? Because if they can't breach the primary target, it's very easy to find who the third-party vendors are and use that instead. So we have to understand again as we move forward, right? Ransomware groups used to have some sort of code of conduct. We weren't going to attack healthcare. We weren't going to attack critical infrastructure. But nobility only extends as far as acceptability. If it is thought to be acceptable to break into a water plant, or as we saw with Colonial, then it's noble to teach them a lesson for not having good security, even if it's the cost of all of their consumers. So I want to take a quick moment on ransomware. It has changed. When I started in the industry 20 years ago, we never even had this concept of ransomware. As we have moved forward, now ransomware moved from just locking your computers. Now it's being auctioned off bit by bit, as we saw with Grumman and Shire, where they're still breaking it out in pieces and auctioning it off to make the suffering last as long as it possibly can. This is going to get worse, as we have seen. When we're seeing breaches of governments, the threat actors are threatening to release the identities of confidential informants and undercover officers, where they could potentially be killed. And we are moving heavily into automation. So many threat groups don't even know that a company has been breached until the company reaches out to make payment on a ransomware. There are simply too many companies that they have breached at a single time to keep track with every one of them. So always remember, you can't encrypt something if you can't read it. So if you can read a Word document, if you can read a network share, that means your account can theoretically and most likely encrypt that data. So here's how we solve this little bit, right? I want you to go ahead and assume that all of your credentials have been breached. Just take a moment and just go ahead and accept that as a reality. If you have an account online, if you're using a third-party group, go ahead and assume they've been breached, because the company probably doesn't know they've been breached yet either. And if they have been breached and they do know, they may not have told you. So we have to do things such as two-factor authentication, where you get a text on your phone or you have an app like Duo that you can validate and verify that you are who you are. I get notifications quite frequently from third-party vendors that I thought that I could trust, including financial groups, where I get a text or I get a reminder asking me to provide that second factor of authentication. That little bit of information is going to prevent someone from logging into your accounts. It's also going to let you know which account you need to go to address. And remember, as we move everything to the cloud-based breaches have taken off as well. So the results, right? Breaches last longer, credential reuse has increased. If your credentials have been dumped in a breach, they can be reused any other place that you're using those same credentials. You have to remember to use a password manager. You have to have two-factor authentication. If you don't know how to do these things, reach out to me. This is not a sales pitch. I'm more than willing to send you some information for absolutely nothing to some reputable groups that can help you at least buy those products. And if you need some assistance, we're glad to help you. But really, I just want to see you help yourself as much as you can as well. So here's how we get ready, okay? Super quick version. You have to have a plan. When we are brought into an incident and the Secret Service and the FBI are already there, that is not the time to figure out what you're going to do. Again, make it totally clear. If you're waiting until the Secret Service and the FBI come to your office to tell you an event has happened, it is way too late to make a plan. They already have a plan, and they're going to use their plan no matter how it impacts your organization. Now, when you build this plan, it has to have things like backups, remote sites, who you're going to call when you have issues. Who's your cybersecurity team? Who's your media advisors? Who's going to do those interactions? Is there a place where you can quickly buy equipment if yours is locked up with ransomware so that you can begin to interact with your customers and go ahead and start restoring faith in your organization? The other is you need to test this. Have at least some tabletop testing where you get around the table with the people that are going to be responsible for enacting this plan. Make sure they understand what they need to do, how they're going to move forward with it. And again, if you don't know how to do this, reach out. We are more than happy to help you get a better understanding of how this works. Do not store this plan on a server. I know that this may seem obvious in this talk, but the amount of times that we go into an incident and everything is encrypted and the plan is on that encrypted share, they can't get to it and that plan might as well not exist. Test that plan often. Now, you need to know what you have to protect. So make sure you do a cybersecurity assessment before we get into this point. Understand where everything lives. Most organizations do not know where their assets live. They don't know where their data lives. If they have an idea, they remember it being on a server, they remember it being in SharePoint, but it has been a long time. And a lot of changes have taken place through COVID. So you need to take the time to understand where everything lives and what you're going to do about it. Often we'll focus on the device, but really we need to focus on the data itself, because you don't always know where that device is going to be, or what data that device is, or the device that data is going to live on. So let's make sure we take the time to understand that. Again, as I mentioned a moment ago, multi-factor authentication. It really is going to be your best, if not second best defense, if right next to a passphrase manager. I know that we call them password managers. I don't really believe in doing that. If you're creating passwords, your mind's typically going to go to summer 2021 exclamation mark, or winter 2021 exclamation mark. But if you start using passphrases instead of passwords, you're going to be better off. Things such as "I love the Rolling Stones!" exclamation mark, but change those values into numerical values. So like your O's or zeros, your E's or threes. These are much harder to crack. They're easier to understand. And if you use something similar to that for your passphrase manager, then you can start randomizing those passwords for the other services. Now, most passphrase managers are going to tell you if you're reusing credentials between one site to another. If you are, go ahead and use that hint to go and change those. That way, should something happen to one of those accounts, the other will not be impacted. Now, I know browsers allow you to save credentials, but I would caution against that. The encryption, the way they're stored, better yet, how attackers can go pull that data is much easier in a browser than the challenges we're going to have pulling it from the passphrase manager. So take the time to get a proper manager with proper two-factor authentication and put that in place. Now, reduce the attack surface. You don't have to protect what you don't have. So if the data no longer has utility, let's move it off the network. Make sure you have policies, procedures, guidelines, and standards around how data is going to be handled, especially as we're taking things and moving them into cloud offerings. We want to understand where this sensitive information is going, so that should you have an incident take place, it will be easy for you to track down where you need to go look first to understand the attack, and then recover and carry your business forward. So Microsoft's done a very, very good job at this. We're getting patches every month. They're usually on the second Tuesday. Other vendors are starting to do this as well. But as we start moving into the cloud and we reduce the visibility, as in, your logs aren't going into a typical SIEM as they used to, or you're not able to look at the traffic between that server and the firewall. You want to make sure that you're monitoring things, you're patching things, you're applying templates to them to harden them. Just make sure you understand where your data lives and the footprint that it has, and more likely the risk that it could have against your organization if it's compromised. And again, if you have any issues in understanding what you need to do to solve this problem, please reach out and let us know. Okay, so we're getting towards the end of it. We got about 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure we cover some of these things as much as we can. So third-party vendor agreements tends to be where the issue really, really lies in breaches in companies. So if there's a breach in an organization or in their partner, that breach is now the company's breach. If you look at Marriott, the breach was at Starwood. In fact, they had it twice. But no one really looks at it as a Starwood breach, they look at it as a Marriott breach. When Target had a breach from the HVAC vendor, we don't really look at the HVAC vendor as where the breach took place. We label it as the Target breach. So here's the important thing. You have to make sure that your third-party vendors are holding the same importance to cybersecurity, that their security posture is close to yours. And I recommend doing a third-party vendor agreement. Make sure it's well vetted, well reviewed. Make sure that those third-party vendors are getting cybersecurity audits. Let's make certain that you get proof of this. A lot of organizations will grab a workbook and they'll just check it off and hand it to you. That's not really going to help. You want to make sure that you have their most recent SOC report, or can you get the findings from their last PCI audit? You need to look at any sort of evidence you can that this company is doing the due diligence and due care that's required to keep your faith in the organization and to give the greatest chance of preventing a breach. And again, just kind of reminding, their breach becomes your breach when you move to a third party. So I want to talk about the future real quick. There's a lot of talk, and there has been for many, many years now, about brand new technologies that are put out into the world. We're seeing machine learning, AI, blockchain, and we're talking about zero trust now. So though these things are really great concepts, right? Like zero trust, and by the definition that I have on the screen, it's around a belief that you should not automatically trust anything. That sounds really, really great, but it's also really, really hard. Most organizations are having difficulties in just knowing where their data lives, or getting the right, keeping their firewalls up to date, or just doing daily security log reviews so that they understand in a reasonable amount of time when an event takes place. Moving to the point where we automatically trust nothing or no one, that's going to take a lot of work. And that's not something that you're going to be able to just go out and buy. So I want to caution organizations to use your funds wisely. Chances are a lot of the controls that you need and a lot of the defensive techniques that you need are already in your organization. We find most of the time that organizations just don't know that it's there. They brought a product, they really haven't had the time to master it yet, and it's sitting right there in the corner. So if you have a company come in like Critical Path or another, I would advise you to take a look at what you have. Take the time to see if you've already bought something that's already best of breed. See if it's something that already works well in your organization, and then move forward with those before we start grabbing blinky light boxes and brand new software and putting them in the rack. So in closing, I want to thank you. This is an incredible event. I have been watching every single speaker today, and I've learned something from every single one. And I know that it's just going to continue through the rest of the week. As you'll notice on this slide, I did not put sales@criticalpathsecurity on here. This is my email address. If you have a question, if you have a concern, if you have a question, or if you have some sort of thought that you would like to get better understanding on, reach out to me at this address. I will answer you personally and help you in any way that we can. And with that, thank you so very much for your time today.